In the annals of British history, one monarch stands apart for both his imperial ambitions and his tragic struggles, George III. To many, he is remembered as the king who lost America, and to others as a mad king, tormented by an unknown illness that shattered his mind. But was he truly insane, or was he simply a victim of political upheaval and personal misfortune? Join us on this 7-minute journey through a reign that saw the dawning of revolutions, the birth of modern Britain, and the dissolution of an empire. George William Frederick was born on June 4, 1738. From a young age, he was groomed for greatness, third in line to the throne, but destined to inherit it sooner than he might have imagined. In 1760, at just 22 years old, George ascended to the throne upon the death of his grandfather, King George II. The youthful king immediately made an impression, announcing, "I glory in the name of Britain." For the first time in decades, the monarchy seemed more English than German. The public initially adored their new king. He was devout, moral, and determined to rule with virtue. But behind the scenes, cracks were forming. George III inherited a kingdom already entangled in global conflicts, including the 7 Years' War. His reign began amid military victories that expanded Britain's overseas empire. Yet this success came at a staggering cost, both financial and diplomatic. It wasn't long before political factions and power struggles in Parliament tested the young monarch's resolve. Across the Atlantic, Britain's colonies in North America were growing restless. Burdened by the debts of the 7 Years' War, Britain imposed new taxes like the Stamp Act and the Tea Act on the colonies. King George III, determined to maintain authority, supported these measures. Colonists, however, saw them as unjust, sparking cries of no taxation without representation. Protests escalated into acts of rebellion, culminating in events like the Boston Tea Party. To George III, the American colonies were a vital part of the empire, and any sign of rebellion was a direct challenge to his sovereign power. In 1775, armed conflict broke out at Lexington and Concord. A year later, the Declaration of Independence was signed, labeling George III a tyrant, unfit to rule a free people. For the king, this was an unforgivable act of treason, one that would define his reign and the future of two nations. The American Revolutionary War was not just a distant conflict for King George. It was a personal affront to his authority. Determined to crush the rebellion, Britain dispatched thousands of troops, confident in their military superiority. Yet the vastness of the American continent, combined with French support for the rebels, turned the tide. Key British defeats at Saratoga and Yorktown signaled the beginning of the end. In 1783, with the Treaty of Paris, Britain officially recognized American independence. For George III, this was the ultimate humiliation. He had lost 13 colonies that formed the backbone of Britain's North American empire. The once idealistic king now found himself branded as the man who lost America. But the king's troubles did not end there. As the empire's fortunes waned, his mental and physical health deteriorated, a decline that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Historians still debate the true nature of George III's madness. Some suggest he suffered from porphyria, a rare blood disorder causing episodes of confusion, mania, and abdominal pain. Others argue he experienced bipolar disorder or severe depression, triggered by the immense pressures of war and state. During these episodes, George III was said to speak endlessly for hours, sometimes foaming at the mouth. He wore ragged clothing and was confined under strict supervision. Despite his suffering, the king's afflictions were often met with brutal 18th-century treatments, leeches, bloodletting, and dubious medications that likely exacerbated his condition. Yet through it all, George III clung to his sense of duty, occasionally regaining clarity and resuming royal responsibilities. As his illness progressed, Parliament debated installing his eldest son, the future George IV, as regent, an arrangement that would strip the king of his powers. By 1810, another severe bout of illness left George III permanently unfit to rule. The Regency Act of 1811 effectively ended his reign in all but name. George III lived until 1820, blind, deaf, and mentally tormented. He never fully recovered from the loss of America or from his own deteriorating mind. In death, the king who once declared, "I glory in the name of Britain," left behind a complex legacy. On one hand, he presided over an era of cultural flowering, the Age of Enlightenment in Britain, and expanded territories in India. On the other, he is forever known as the monarch who lost the American colonies and succumbed to madness. Today, many historians see George III not as a tyrant, but as a tragic figure. A man burdened by the crown at a time when the world was changing faster than any king could control. Was he truly insane, or was he simply the scapegoat for an empire's failings? The answer may lie in the pages of history, where the truth, like the mind of George III, remains elusive and deeply human.